Thank you, Guy, for that excellent introduction and the global overview for the some solutions, some threats, and a call for alliances. We will start a small alliance here tonight with practitioners from Norway, Brazil, and the United States. So I will briefly introduce the panel, and we'll have a talk here, and then we'll open up for discussions afterwards. So please write down or behind your ear on a notepad or anywhere your questions. But we will start with our friend from New York, Neena Kapur. She is an information security analyst at the New York Times, where she trains journalists and identifies threats and trying to keep the media organization safe. Please come up, Neena. And from Brazil, from Rio de Janeiro, we have Leandro Demori, who's the executive editor at The Intercept Brazil, an author and investigative journalist who've covered corruption in his country extensively, and also the largest leak in Brazil and possibly the world. Come on up, Leandro. And from our own Norway, we have Osman Kibar, who is one of, or maybe the leading journalist on technology, cyber, and surveillance here in Norway. He works at Dagens Næringsliv. Very happy to have you. So we have two journalists and one security analyst from 3 different countries, 3 quite different cultures and contexts, but all facing some of the similar challenges, I think, that we saw Guy talk about here. And to build on Guy's talk, where there was a lot of recognizable things for all of us, unfortunately. I wanted to start with you, Neena, if you can, because you work, you have a team of 12 people at the New York Times who work on digital safety for your newsrooms. I might be wrong, but I don't think we have that size of security teams in any Norwegian news organization. Could you say what are the threats that you are facing, and how do you work?
Yeah. Hello? Yeah, okay, it's working. Yeah, absolutely. So actually, Guy really distilled a lot of my thoughts on digital security in a very eloquent way that I think kind of helps set a framework for how to kind of interpret different types of threats. And when thinking about threats that face the journalists that we work with, as well as other media organizations that we collaborate with in talking about security and safety, the threats really differentiate depending, again, on what people are covering and also the venues through which they're promoting their work. And I think that sometimes we like to, in the security space, talk about, oh my gosh, government surveillance is the worst kind of threat out there. And it is horrible. But at the same time, now that social media is the prominent place to promote work and things of that sort, that also becomes a completely different venue of targeted harassment that can lead to physical threats, threats to family members, things of that sort as well. That becomes equally as important, even if the actors who are perpetrating those threats, may be significantly less sophisticated than the Chinese government, for example, right? So I think a discussion point that we always have is that the sophistication of the actor is less important than the actual kind of outcome of the threats against the journalist. So one of the things that, recently I've been really focusing on is related to social media threats. Unexpected responses to articles that are published, as well as expected responses that kind of result in the internet spinning in different ways and data or personal information about individuals being posted publicly that once that's publicly posted, it's difficult to determine what that's going to turn into. Sometimes the internet will move on and nobody will care in 2 days. And other times that information will then propagate and spread around different spaces of the internet that could result in more physical threats, which become serious, as well as continued targeting of an individual or other individuals who may cover that same topic. And I think that's something that we really think pretty critically about and are actively kind of working and reacting to defend. And that ranges from digital security means of, how do you lock down your accounts? How do you decrease your online footprint? As well as, we have a separate team that my team collaborates with pretty closely. How do you psychologically deal with all of this crap, right? How do you deal with it? How do you put your Twitter notifications off and continue to be and feel fulfillment in your work and want to continue doing and covering the topics you do? And that's obviously equally, if not more important than just locking down your information. And I think that's kind of why the digital security world has evolved into just, you can't just be talking about digital security when you're responding to threats that come through digital security means. You have to be talking about the physical security aspect, the psychological safety aspect, and also then have the tough conversations of who are the more vulnerable populations within the journalist community who are receiving these kinds of threats.
Mm-hmm. And you are facing some of the same issues in Brazil, Leandro. You said to me that 2 months after you started working for The Intercept, you got your first threats.
Yeah, it was 2 years ago. It's true. This presentation is just like a print screen of my life in general.
That's very sad.
Because it's all the playbook that we are suffering all day in our office with our staffers. And I started working on Intercept 2 years ago, and in January, and in March, we did publish some stories about the Marielle Franco assassination that most of you must know. It was a congresswoman assassinated in Brazil, a city council, in fact, assassinated in Brazil. And we was the first media outlet to link the assassination of Marielle Franco with militias in the country. So since then, that March, 1.5 years ago, we started to receive threats, and now I'm realizing that it was not digital threats, it's always physical. This is the very way, the problem that we are facing right now, because it's very hard to handle with that, because it seems, it's just people talking on Twitter. It's not important, but day by day, tons of messages against you to discredit your work, people or robots, or as we say in Brazil, these digital militias, in some ways fueled by the government itself, Jair Bolsonaro, the president itself, the Minister of Justice, Sergio Moro itself. They are fueling these people in these digital militias against journalists every day, calling journalists enemies of democracy, the worst people in the country, the ones that must be eliminated, enemies of the progress. So day by day, we need to face that with our staffers. And it's way hard for women. I think in the United States it's the same, because if you go to read all the digital threats with women, it's the worst kind of thing you can imagine. So, and at the same time, in Intercept, we don't talk with our staffers about how they need to act on Twitter or on social media. We don't have standards. We don't say, no, don't do that or do that. This is the way that we need to do on Intercept. But at the same time, we need to support them when the attacks happen. So we are facing this right now. It's very hard to understand how to do and how to act. The chain of solidarity, I think, is the most important when these kind of attacks happen with your colleagues.
Yeah, you mentioned women are particularly vulnerable, and I think I talked to all of you, and you say that women are also the ones we're not as good at protecting ourselves online. We're the most vulnerable, yet we have the least digital safety competence, if you can say so. You've been working with this, Neena. Why is why we're vulnerable, we know, but why are we so bad at protecting ourselves online?
I wouldn't say that I would that like women are particularly like worse at digital competence. I think that there's certain levels, and I think that in many ways, sometimes in order to kind of beat that gender gap and promote your work and things of that sort, there requires additional vulnerability online to begin with, right? And that can, of course, then lead to further threats and things of that sort that kind of come in. And I think one thing that just across the board is that, and I'm sure we'll talk about this more in this panel, is that security is a burden, right? It is a burden in a lot of ways and disrupts your workflow in a lot of ways if you are constantly, having to enter in your other codes and use your different apps and so on and so forth. And I think that's kind of where there is a lot of work to be done in creating security workflows and security tools that are actually, that work with how people work, right? That aren't just, here's a great tool, use it, it'll make you super secure, but no, here's a tool that actually works with your workflow, and here's a solution that kind of meets people halfway. And I think that's really where that discussion needs to happen, because yeah, for vulnerable populations, women, people of color, the LGBTQ community, there's obviously like already a higher level of risk for those individuals, but at the same time, adding significant layers of security to their workflow could also really prevent them from reporting on awesome stuff, right? So that's kind of where that fine balance comes into play, where security practitioners, I think, have to be much more conscious of vulnerable populations have needs and have like they, at the end of the day, they have to publish the news. And how can like security actually be effectively incorporated into that publication process, like that source communication process, rather than kind of just critiquing people for, you know, not having two-factor authentication on. There's probably a reason for that in that specific moment. So instead, how can you find a solution that actually works for that person, for that story, for that kind of workflow?
And this is what you are exactly working
Yeah,
on at the
yeah.
times, right? So Guy was also mentioning the different levels of responsibility. You have the individual level where the journalists themselves have to, you know, protect themselves, which is, like you say, it's a burden, and it's not always easy. You have the institutions, the platforms, the media, social media platforms, the state, the societal, and the global level. And you and I, Osman, we are very lucky journalists. We work and live in Norway, which is the number one on freedom of the press at the Reporters Without Frontiers. I saw United States is 48 and Brazil is 105. So
Sorry.
I mean, but still, you wanted to also add that there is still also journalists in Norway living with protections. Also, journalists here, like everywhere, are being threatened. And you've had some experiences also with the Norwegian government that you wanted to share.
So I wanted to take that as a point of departure, and the fact that Norway was the number one country regarding the press freedom in the world. So in theory, should I have to turn it on?
Or just hold it closer to your...
So in theory, there should be no government interference at all. No one trying to stop the free flow of information, and no one trying to investigate the relationship between the journalist and its source, right? Because it's the number one country in the world. And what I found out is that unfortunately that's only partially true. Every year, the Norwegian Ministry of Foreign Affairs sends out a press release in May, coinciding with the World Press Freedom Day. And the message in that press release is that they criticize the lack of press freedom everywhere else. They state the importance of access to information and the importance of transparency and accountability, which are really important things, and it's a good thing that they do this. However, I found out that they do precisely these breaches, so to say, on home turf as well. And what is surprising is how little debate there is about it, and how and that even the Norwegian press is not really aware of it. So my conclusion from this little investigation is that there is a line that you can't cross. It's like Norway is no exception. Just like any other country in the world, there's a line you don't cross. And this is quite a bold claim, so I have the data to back it up. So if you have the patience, I can just sum it up briefly. 3 years ago, Dagens Næringsliv, my newspaper, published a news story which revealed that the government would spend 25 billion kroner less than what the military expected or wanted in the next 20 years. And the reaction was that Norway's police security service, the intelligence service basically, immediately said they would open an investigation into the leak. And they did. So no one knows how they investigated this, but they did. And it somehow ended in a way. I don't know. Maybe they closed it. 1 year later, in 2017, still in my newspaper, Dagens Næringsliv, we published a report. I was not the reporter, it was my colleagues. That was a report from the Office of the Auditor General in Norway, which is Riksrevisjonen in Norwegian. And the conclusion of the report was that the government hadn't done its homework regarding security for critical infrastructure and physical facilities. That they had promised to do it, they didn't do it. And they wanted to keep this report secret. So my great colleagues managed to get hold of the report. But the result of this was that the Minister of Defense, she went to the PST, which is the Norwegian secret police, so to say, and ordered a full investigation into Dagens Næringsliv's sources. So what is a little bit ironic here is that the same person who wrote the press releases, at least she was quoted saying these things in the press releases from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, was the very same minister that ordered this investigation. So, and so I thought this must be an exception, but the list goes on, and my newspaper is not the only one. When TV2, Norway's largest commercial broadcaster, revealed secret NATO documents about the security of wheeled vehicles that was going to be used in Afghanistan, the message was basically the vehicles are not as safe as the PR materials claim, so it wasn't really a huge thing. Then what happened was that the Ministry of Defense, let me check. So Norway's armed forces stated that the military police was pondering how to open a criminal investigation into this affair. Okay, so I hope you're not bored because I'll quickly go through these examples. 2 years earlier, VG, Norway's largest newspaper, could reveal that it would cost much more than planned to move Norway's joint military headquarters to a new location. And that would cost a lot more. Result, the Minister of Defense ordered a full investigation through PST. And of course, there's I
think we get the picture.
A long list,
I think it sounds like the line goes somewhere along the military, right? I
mean,
that you can.
So that's the point.
And you're saying the government here goes after your sources.
Well,
or at least tries to.
From all the examples that's the method. That if you write about things concerning national security, the army, Ministry of Defense, then all these principles which they claim in the press release, they're not valid anymore. Then Norway is just like any other country. So to sum it up, you could say that, okay, but it's still the world's freest country when it comes to press freedom, right? So if I don't write about the defense industry, I'm fine. Unfortunately, you're not, because very soon they will roll out the most comprehensive surveillance system ever in Norway's history. It's called the Digital Border Defense System, and it has been debated. And basically, all the communication that passes through Norway's fiber optic networks will be filtered, analyzed, stored, and surveilled. So what is a bad thing for journalism with this infrastructure, new infrastructure, is that it effectively means the end of reporter's privilege. Reporter's privilege is that the government should not interfere with the relationship between the journalist and his sources. And now you can't practice that policy anymore because it will be surveillance by default. So then you can say, but hey, these are the good guys, they work for our security so that there's no terrorism incident, etc. But if you write about these subjects, then it will be much more easy to find your sources than before.
Yeah, so you cannot protect your sources, which is, of course, a key element in any kind of journalism. And you had your sources.
I have my list here. Sorry.
Sorry.
Well, we were talking about this yesterday. Yeah, the problem for me is when the government reacts in this way. And in our case in Brazil, they arrested 4 guys three months ago, claiming that they are sources from the Intercept in Brazil. The message is, don't turn yourself on Mr. Berger. Stop to talk to journalists. This is the problem. They want to stop all the leaks because today, for being journalists in a country like Brazil, but I think here's the same in Europe, it's the same in the United States is the same. You need to work with mega leaks because it's the only way you can grab
mega leaks.
These mega leaks, these leaks of information, just like Snowden case or WikiLeaks or car wash leaks that we published in Brazil, because you can grab real good and important information with these whistleblowers, because the governments, they are more and more closer They are closing the channels to talk to journalists. In fact, they are just claiming that we are the enemies of people, so they don't need to talk to us. They don't need to respond to us. We are fake news, as in the United States. The playbook's every time the same in Hungary with Viktor Orban or Matteo Salvini in Italy, or in Poland, or in Brazil, or in the United States, or in Philippines is the same case of Maria Ressa case. So the message is, we will arrest everyone that tries to get contact with journalists. And this is the way they are trying to close all the public information to the public.
Have you noticed that you get fewer tips, or you get less information in than before?
We are receiving more information, but the problem is when you start to talk with your sources and they understand that they need to protect themselves, or using secure drop, or setting up a VPN, or trying to understand what is Tor, they just disappear. Because they started to realize, oh my God, maybe this is dangerous. Okay, I can remember that 4 guys arrested because they talked to Intercept. So I will not do that. So this is the message for us, in our country.
So they are scared. So it's difficult to protect
They are scared.
both the journalists and the sources in this environment. We talked, just one more point before we open up for questions. Guy also mentioned in his talk that 2019, the new kind of digital threat is disinformation and manipulation of information. So it's not necessarily the attacks on the journalists, but it's you bury good journalism in loads of bots and fake news, or you try to trick journalists into believing something that is not true to undermine the credibility. And I know you don't work with this specifically, Neena, but we're all watching, the presidential elections in your country. How do you work? Do you take any measures, and are you preparing your journalists for a quite dirty presidential campaign?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. And I think that there are a couple of things that my team kind of works on when thinking about this. One big thing is there's so much out there relating to threats against journalists, right? So one big thing is distilling what specifically are the threats we need to focus on. Unfortunately, I mean, we're a team of 12, which is better than a lot of other places, and we're really fortunate to have that, but like we need to be a team of 50, right? Like that's still not enough. So how do you kind of focus in on threats that you actually need to be looking at? I mean, a big thing that we work on with our politics reporters now, because they just have a higher level of exposure, is preventative measures. What can we do proactively to reduce their online footprint, to lock down their accounts, to give them content and checklists on what to do when likely there will be some sort of backlash online, or some sort of attempt to discredit information that they're publishing. And a lot of the misinformation stuff that I think that my team deals with is that fallout that happens once misinformation is circulating. What happens to the journalist who is at the center of that? Who is starting to target them? How is that harassment evolving? Is it something that the internet will forget about tomorrow, or is it something that, again, will require a lot of internal support to kind of get through that? And I think that's the unfortunate part about misinformation, right? One is it's false, right? It's spreading a false narrative. And two is that it's another digital venue for potential physical threats, or threats against other people who are associated with that individual or that topic.
Mm-hmm. Is this something you experience in Brazil as well?
Yeah, in general, I say to my colleagues, stay calm. It's not on you. They are just trying to silence you. They are trying to create all the narratives that you can believe that is you a journalist? Yeah. Did you study journalism for sure? I can't believe you write that bad. And this kind of pressure day by day. So stay calm. It's not about you. Second, don't fight back. I'm not good on that. I always fight back. But okay, I'm talking every day to my colleagues. Don't fight back. Or if you go to fight back, you must know if you're talking to a real person or a bot or these digital militias, and you need to understand what they want. In general, they want to silence you. So if you want to fight back and enjoy. Use ironically or doing jokes, or you don't need to engage on that just like a war, just like a digital war, because it's not. In the other hook, they are just laughing on you. They are just trying to silence you. So it's that I think the most important is stay calm and don't fight back. And at the end, block them all. On Twitter, I have more than 2,000 Twitter accounts blocked. I block people every day. It's fantastic. It's just like, oh my God, block it. No, block it. And sometimes, I don't say that as a strategy, but sometimes I wrote the responses and don't send. Just wrote that response that you want to respond. Okay, your mother, and you don't send. It's quite good to do that too. It's just psychological, yeah.
I think this is
self-defense,
very good advice to many of us.
So
Let's open.
It's not orthodox, but I think it works.
It seems to work for you. You seem like
it works.
quite happy with your 2,000 blocked accounts.
Yeah. I love block people.
Let's open up for questions, shall we? If you could raise a hand and please introduce yourself before, and also please ask questions, not long analysis. There's a lady here in glasses.
Hi, I'm Julie Pizzetti from the Reuters Institute and CFOM and the International Centre for Journalists. And I am one of the people that Guy referenced earlier. I just wanted to pull you back to that, one of the last points you made around not fighting back, and to problematize that a little bit. Because as much as what I think you're saying is don't engage with people that people or bots who are seeking to simply provoke you. But I would argue that collectively, collaboratively, we do need to fight back, and we need to do so very strategically. Otherwise, we end up in a situation where we are being chilled by default. And I hear that a lot, just, develop a thicker skin, don't fight back. And I think one of the points that Maria Ressa and her case study demonstrate is the great power of a collective journalism response to do that. So can you just talk to that a little bit, please? Perhaps you in the first instance.
Precisely. So it's precisely that. Thanks for asking. Don't fight back with bots or this digital militias guy, but fight back against anyone that's trying to spread fake news against you or false information against you or discredit your job. And you need to have this chain of solidarity. So call your colleagues, talk to your friends, talk to your journalist friends and say, look, can you help me with this issue? And we do that in Brazil a lot. This year, this year in 2019, I became world trending topic because I was a pedophile in Brazil. They are tweeting that. Leandro Demori is a pedophile. They just grabbed tweets of mine from 2008 or 2009, 2010, and out of context, of course, and spread it in a Saturday, tons of messages on me, tons of messages. When I woke up, I saw, oh my God, I'm on the world's trending topic on Twitter, woohoo! And when I was starting to look, I was just like terrified. I needed to uninstall the Twitter app from iPhone for 2 days because it was terrific. My wife was pregnant at the time. So in these cases, you need to fight back. You need to talk to journalists association. You need to talk to public ministry. You need to talk to police. You need to talk to your colleagues and expose them all in these cases. So you need to understand which case is the case you need to fight back. So it's precisely that. Thanks for your clarification.
Any other questions? There was a hand here, to the right here.
Hi, my name is Hanadi Dwikat. I am a lecturer at Arab American University from Palestine. Actually, my question for Leonardo, thank you for your technique. It's a good strategy, but I think it's not working for all journalists. So you have funny response, let's say, but do you have any association in Brazil like they give support to journalists who have such cases, who had threats, and plus seriously, do you have this time to block people 2000?
Yes, I do. This is why, because I love Twitter. But at the same time, I say that Twitter in Brazil is some kind of hate machine. And I say that to Twitter employees that works in Brazil. You are the hate machine, because you know that the human feeling that moves people to go to your app, to give you eyeballs, is hate. You know that. You don't want to solve this problem. You are part of the problem. So we have an association in Brazil called ABRAGE, Association of Investigative Journalism, that we support our journalists with Committee for Protection of Journalists. And of course, we are learning how to do that, because it's very new in Brazil. We are experiencing some kind of level of aggressivity in the last 10 or 12 months that we have never seen that before. So we are learning with our colleagues. But I think the most important thing to do inside associations is to support our colleagues, but to fight with the social networks too. Facebook, Twitter, Google, they are the hate machine. They are doing money with our eyeballs. They are doing money with hate, and they don't want to solve the problem. In Brazil, what they did, they get some small pieces of money to fact-checking agencies, and said, okay, just solve the problem. You, fact-checker, solve the problem. Go to Facebook, read tons of shit every day, and you need to say to Facebook, oh my God, this is fake news. Oh my God, this is good news. Oh my God, this is fake news. Fact-checkers, they will not fix the problem. Facebook needs to fix the problem. Twitter needs to fix the problem. Google needs to fix the problem. They are the hate machine. So I think that as journalists participating on these associations, we need to talk to them on these cases too.
Yeah, I was just talking to you earlier, Neena. You said you never imagined spending this much time on Twitter as a security analyst.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the threat landscape has just evolved in the past several years, right? I think that the amount of digital threats on social media platforms is just unparalleled right now. And I think, kind of to your point, we need to pressure social media platforms, but at the same time, it's hard to expect that from them. I'm not defending them, but I'm saying that they can't react fast enough, and waiting for them to make a change is not going to be the solution. Again, fortunately, I can work with some security folks of those platforms. That's not going to be a solution for everybody. And it's difficult. I mean, oftentimes I see some journalists will just tweet and call somebody out on Twitter and say, mass report this person, right? And if it requires mass reporting somebody, then maybe eventually that, the platform will take it down. But again, you're waiting on the platform to actually take that action. And I don't think that, maybe in 10 years, they'll figure it out and they'll have some great AI, whatever, to figure it out faster. And there are people on those ends who are working on that. But I personally am not super optimistic. And not from like a negative standpoint with those organizations, mainly because they're dealing with so much stuff on there. How can I assure a journalist I'm working with that, don't worry, Facebook will take it down, I promise you, tomorrow, because I have no idea. And I think similarly, like, we are learning how to appropriately respond. And I think that's, again, where a lot of this collaboration is required, because if there's an individual who's threatening journalist X, they're also likely threatening 10 other journalists, right? And they're likely also involved in hate campaigns against many other people covering those topics. And that becomes like where we need to start working together to recognize those patterns, right? Is this an innocuous threat that somebody, in his mom's basement is throwing at you, or is this somebody who's systematically threatening a lot of people? And that's, again, where the information sharing, I think, becomes super, super critical, because it'd be awesome if social media platforms cooperated and did this for us, but I'm wary of their speed on actually reacting to it. And I know that's not a great answer to actually give you concrete steps, but.
Thank you. There's a guy in the front here. Yes, you'll get a mic just now.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Sylvia Weiss, George Washington University. My question is, if your news organizations monitor on social media what is being said about your journalists or about the news organization. And the reason why I'm asking is because I know some news organizations do that for one main reason. One is to get a sense to scan whether or not, this sort of more organized talk in social media that eventually might turn into either verbal attacks or more like physical attacks to journalists. And the other reason is, I will add, is because the platforms are not interested in knowing what's going on in the platforms. The less you know, the less they know, the better it is, because they are not legally responsible. So if you scan and produce data on what is being said about, let's say, journalists or news organizations, in some ways you produce evidence, and then when you talk to them, you confront them, saying like, this is actual evidence. It's not just hearsay or happened to me. So back to my original question, do your news organizations scan, analyze data, what is being said about reporters and news organizations? Thank you.
My answer is that we try to, but it's really hard to be comprehensive in terms of just the vast amount of data out there and just comments and how things propagate so quickly. I'll be honest, I think that at least within like the US media security teams that I talk with, a lot of our response is very reactive. It's reacting to things kind of propagating, and I think if anything, now we are starting to move into the more proactive monitoring. And the biggest reason is bandwidth. It's easier to stop the bleeding initially, and now that once you can have the bandwidth to have more people actually monitoring, that's when you can start moving into it. And I think that's the direction that at least the folks I talk with, media security, is heading. But I would say that it's an immense amount of work, and it's hard to be really comprehensive, at least from my experience.
In Intercept we don't do, but in Abrage, our journalism association, we do. We have had more than 200 digital attacks, digital/physical attacks, during the elections last year in Brazil, reported to Abrage. We don't know how many others we didn't aware about them. And what you do is to scrap all this data, trying to understand each case, and after that, talking to the platforms and even with the public ministry. We are trying to set up some kind of quick response on every case, but because it's very hard to respond, because when it happens, you just need 1 hour to scare anyone. 1 hour and on Twitter with 200 Twitter accounts talking stuff on you. You can't react quickly. It's very hard to do that. So we are trying to understand with the public ministry what we can do. In general, when you discover who is the person behind the Twitter account, and the public ministry calls that person to explain, this person was just like, oh my God, I'm sorry, I didn't realize that it was important, or I was in the bad day. In general, they are not the bad guys. They're just regular people posting on Twitter. So we are still trying to understand the profile of these attackers. We are in the phase one, as I must say.
I'd also really quickly add that's a thing that we found to be somewhat effective in terms of, again, dealing with bandwidth and such, is anticipating backlash based off of stories that are being worked on. If there are communities in Twitter that are particularly vocal, alt-right is obviously a great one generally to talk about, and we know somebody's working on a story, that's when there can be more proactive monitoring about the kind of threats against individuals. If there's an event that's happening, the New York Times hosted a political debate like a month ago. That was an event where we could be more proactive about it. So it's kind of like, again, kind of distilling the threat landscape into more specific things to look at versus, again, just trying to monitor all of Twitter. Because, again, that would be awesome, but unfortunately, yeah, it's a little bit unfeasible at this point.
Any measures like this at Dagens Næringsliv, Osman?
Not. So I'm thinking that probably if the story is important enough and the adversary is powerful enough, attacks will come and pushbacks will happen. So the question is, do we do a good enough job as reporters if we don't experience such attacks? That could be one tabloid way of saying it. But I think that very often digital security is framed as something that is needed because you have an oppressive state, right? It's very often we talk about it in those terms, and I think it's important to extend the definition and the scope to everything, because every time someone has something to win or lose because of your story, then you are kind of at risk. An example could be coming from a financial newspaper. Just knowing what companies a newspaper will write about in a way that affects their stock value is something quite valuable. You don't need to be critical or especially, adversarial. You just, have access to that information, and it's very valuable. So it's just a very simple example of how various groups and interest groups could kind of, so your threat model, as they call it, your risk assessment should also include not only state actors, but various other sectors, for example, in the businesses you write about, or activist groups, etc.
There's a question here in the second row. There's a mic coming.
So quickly, I just want to ask.
Sorry, can you please introduce yourself?
Oh, my name is Rudin Francis Suraj from Nigeria. I'm a lecturer from University of Lagos. Okay, so I just want to ask, based on what he said, that the social media platform owners are the eight machine. Now, the question I want to ask is this, because right now, in my own country, the government is coming up with regulation of social media, which we have been criticizing. And the argument has always been what you just said now. But the issue is this, the media platform owners are saying they are just platform providers. They are not responsible for the content, and based on First Amendment and free speech, and that the society should be able to know what information they want to believe and which one they don't want to believe, which is about media literacy. Now the question is this, are you advocating for regulation? And if you're advocating for regulation, how do you balance that with freedom of speech and expression and the right to an opinion?
Yeah, sorry. If I understood your question, we need to find a balance. It's not easy to find a balance. It's every time we need to talk to the public ministry that we need to crack an IP from some Brazilian citizen. Every time I was just, oh my God, we are attempting against privacy. So it's a hard balance to do, but you need to collect data to understand the patterns. So when you understand that you are being attacked by digital militia, maybe fueled by powerful or by the government or by the Ministry of Justice or by the president itself, we need to fight back. You need to fight back on that cases. But you're not the one that will decide that. You just need to report to public ministry and wait for them to decide what to do. So we are trying to not bring too much cases to them, to the balance between privacy and fighting them back. So it's not easy. As I said, we are in phase 1. We are learning, but yes, we need to do that in some cases.
Yeah, so we have time for one, maybe two more questions. There's right behind you there.
I'm Elizabeth Eide from Journalism and Media International Center, OsloMet, as we're called. I'm glad that you, Guy, also entered the scene here, because my question is perhaps more for you than for the rest. And it has to do with you opening this and saying it's not only about journalism, it's about the larger society. And I was thinking, as a constructive measure, how would it be to sometimes, considering that we media academics are supposed to be in the forefront of digital literacy somehow and teaching that, but how to combine with teacher training, for example? Does UNESCO have some kind of ideas about how we could link up with teacher trainers? Because actually they are the ones who access the generations to come and who need to navigate this media scene, which is so full of diversions and fake news. I have also a question for the others, and that has to do with moderation, because as we know, many of the larger companies, they are outsourcing moderation. I don't know how many of this audience have seen the film The Cleaners, where you see the underpaid moderators sitting in Philippines trying to decide what is fit to be seen and what is not. But it's also happening in Norwegian media and media all across the globe. So how can we believe that they are able to do it right? How can we believe that Facebook and Google will really help us here? Is that naive?
You want to start, Guy, with the first first question then, and then we will join you.
Elizabeth, thank you for the question. Yes, I mean, you're completely right that in the end, it's a societal question, and education is a key way, although it only reaches, depending if you're speaking teachers, that's reaching a certain generation, and it takes a long time. But I think the basic point is that it's part of the puzzle, but we're not going to make the puzzle only with that. Just as it's not only it shouldn't be the burden of individual journalists to have to deal with this issue. You know, it's all those levels that need to be addressed, which makes it complex. But unless we try and put the whole puzzle together, it's really not. I don't think we're going to make progress. But I think a good point made here is, given our limited time and resources, what do you do? Because a journalist, first of all, you can't spend all your time, fighting, because how will you ever do your work? You can't. At the same time, you have to defend all the time, because the moment you drop your defenses, maybe you're going to be more vulnerable. And yet you can't. You don't have to do that alone. But societies set up mechanisms that individuals ought not to have to organize their own security, defense. I mean, they have. Society should have effective police forces, defense forces, and so on. So we have to look at that bigger picture, and at the same time think strategically, because we're not there. What do we do about the question of regulation and social media? What do we do about the teachers? What do we do about these individuals who are threatening? Anyway, and I have on that a question to the colleagues here, if I can add, which is that I think it's only become fairly well known recently about the extent of abuse and attacks on journalists, because a lot of journalists think, well, it comes with the job and they have to tough it out, and they don't want to sort of create a copycat effect. So should journalists be reporting this more, or should they at least document it more? Should they report to the police, even if they think the police are responsible? What are your views on this question?
It's a very good question. Any thoughts? We can start with you, Osman.
So the question is about how to cope with...
What do we do with all the, maybe not the hard attacks, but you get a lot of...
Oh, that's a very hard one. I think it depends on which story you are working on. Well, let me put it this way. I think that a good approach to digital security, this one works better. Yeah, a good approach to, because it all seems very, technical and complicated, and you could say, I don't know anything about the technical stuff. I've never been interested, so where to start? I think the best way to start is to make a risk assessment. The risk assessment you do every time you make a story that involves some risk is, who could be angry for this story? What means do they have? Is it possible that they might use them? And, you start doing a risk analysis, and that is a tool to identify who the threat actors actually are. Maybe it's just, a kid sitting in his room and trolling everyone on 4chan and directly at you. Then it's, you could say it's a bit annoying, but maybe it's not very, threatening. But if you discover that it's a state actor, that it's a troll army that has been unleashed, then you have to... But I think that if you have done that threat analysis in advance of your story, then you're better equipped to cope with it.
Yeah, I think that we can talk about simple tools even. I'm always talking about Twitter because it's just the social network that I use. But for example, why can't I upload my block list to everyone, download and block them all automatically? This is simple to set up, no? Why Twitter don't do that? Why they don't hear us? I always talk about this with all my colleagues that works on Twitter, and they just don't care. They are the hate machine. They are doing money with that. We know this. So it's more easy in Brazil to to denounce Twitter account about DCM, is called the digital, because if you are using Rihanna music or Pink Floyd music, then because hate speech. It's way easy. The employees of Twitter say that to us, like, hey, try to do in that way. That, I mean, it's they are more pro capitalism than human rights. It's easy to understand. So I think we can count on them right now, but we need to pressure them every day to do anything.
Yeah, my thought to kind of respond to your question about whether or not we should report more threats, or less, given that this is just unfortunately the new normal, is I'm of the opinion you should report every threat you get. Through whatever means possible. And of course, going to the police is obviously not possible every time, if that just means reporting it on the platform. The primary reason is I don't think that we should settle for this being the new normal. At this point, women are so used to being called such horrible things that only if it escalates to something really, truly awful will they actually maybe think about reporting it. When in reality, I feel like we need to over-report, whether that's to a security team at your organization, whether that's to like a freedom of the press-esque organization, or even just on the platform itself. I think settling into the number of threats people receive as a new normal, if unfortunately then results in journalists getting used to that, and it's never good psychologically, it's never good societally, and also, in my opinion, it will kind of encourage that machine, that this, even if it's a guy in his basement trolling you, that he can continue calling you a slut every single day, and if you can continuously report that, and whether or not they take action on it, there still are patterns, right? You're still actually emotionally taking an action on it to kind of show that this is not normal, this is not something that you should settle for. And that's again, my opinion of it. Of course, it's time consuming, and I think that, again, escalating it all the way up the levels of the chain is not necessary every time, but taking some sort of action and not accepting that that's what you're okay with happening every day, I think is a really, really important mentality to kind of start getting into, because it's ridiculous that people, that we have to put up with so much stuff before suddenly the alarms raise, like, okay, maybe this is actually a credible threat, when in reality it's all pretty horrific.
I think this is excellent advice to round up an evening. We're a bit on overtime. But thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and experiences, and also concrete advice on how to deal with this. I think one of the key takeaways from this evening is alliances, working together, sharing information, and this is an excellent place to do it. So we invite you to stay for a bit, have something to eat and drink, come to the OsloMet conference tomorrow and Friday and learn more. So thank you very much to OsloMet and to Fritt Ord and to everybody who came. Thank you so much for coming.